Nobody breathed. More than 60 armed bodyguards surrounded an elderly billionaire after a failed assassination attempt turned the most exclusive charity gala in America into a fortress. At the center of the chaos, a frightened plus-size banquet waitress was forced to her knees, accused of helping the attackers. The chief of security pointed a pistol toward her and gave the order, "Search her. If she lies, she doesn't leave this room." She had never met the billionaire before. She had never even heard his voice. Yet as tears streamed down her face, one forgotten Italian word slipped from her lips. Fratellino. The 82-year-old patriarch froze. His crystal glass shattered against the marble floor. Every gun lowered. Every billionaire, politician, judge, and crime boss fell silent. Then the old man whispered 5 words no one expected to hear. "Find out who she really is." Within hours, that single forgotten word would uncover a family secret, buried for more than 60 years, one powerful enough to bring one of America's richest dynasties to the edge of collapse. The annual Ferrante Foundation Charity Gala was more than a fundraising event. It was the one night, each year, when America's wealthiest billionaires, senior politicians, federal judges, diplomats, and international business leaders gathered beneath one roof. Invitations couldn't be purchased. They had to be earned. At precisely 8 o'clock, every conversation inside the Grand Aurora Ballroom faded into respectful silence. Don Vittorio Ferrante entered. At 82 years old, he walked with the steady confidence of a man who had built one of the world's largest financial empires from nothing. His silver hair and calm expression revealed little emotion, yet his presence alone commanded absolute respect. Men who controlled billion-dollar corporations instinctively stood as he passed. No one wanted to disappoint the patriarch, whose decisions could reshape entire industries overnight. Watching quietly from the edge of the ballroom was Elena Romano. At 42, Elena had spent the last year accepting temporary catering jobs after the neighborhood bakery she inherited from her grandmother went bankrupt. Losing the bakery had taken more than her livelihood. It had taken the last connection to the woman who had raised her after her parents died. Still, she refused to surrender to bitterness. She treated every guest with the same gentle smile, whether they noticed her or not. Most didn't. To them, she was simply another waitress carrying silver trays between tables, filled with people whose watches cost more than her former bakery. The catering supervisor gathered the staff one final time. "Listen carefully," he whispered. "Do your job, stay invisible, and never approach Don Ferrante unless security gives permission. One mistake tonight will end your career." Everyone nodded, including Elena. She had no desire to be remembered. She only wanted to finish her shift and collect enough money to pay next month's rent. The orchestra had just begun its final performance when everything changed. A loud crack echoed from the upper balcony. For a brief second, many guests assumed part of the lighting rig had collapsed. Then another shot rang through the ballroom. Screams erupted. Crystal glasses exploded across marble floors as guests dove beneath tables. Security agents rushed toward the stage, while armored bodyguards formed an impenetrable circle around Don Vittorio. One gunman, disguised as a photographer, was shot before he could fire again. But security immediately realized there had been more than one attacker. The ballroom descended into controlled chaos. While frightened guests pushed toward emergency exits, Elena noticed an elderly woman trapped beneath an overturned chair. Ignoring the panic around her, she hurried across the floor and helped lift the heavy chair away before gently supporting the woman to her feet. "You'll be all right," Elena whispered. "Stay behind me." She had taken only 3 more steps when a furious voice thundered through the ballroom. "Stop that woman." Within seconds, armed security officers surrounded her. Before Elena could explain, her wrists were yanked behind her back. Plastic restraints tightened painfully. I was helping her, Elena pleaded. The lady fell. Quiet. Damiano Ricci, the head of Ferrante Security, approached without the slightest trace of sympathy. We're still missing one suspect, he said coldly. Anyone moving during the attack is a potential accomplice. Several terrified guests watched in silence. None dared interfere. Damiano gave another order. Search her. An officer emptied Elena's apron pockets onto a nearby table. 3 folded dollar bills, a worn bakery key, an old family photograph, a tiny silver pendant hanging from a faded chain around her neck. Nothing else. Damiano frowned. Bring her closer. 2 guards forced Elena onto her knees, only a few feet from Don Vittorio. She had never imagined meeting the legendary billionaire like this. The old patriarch didn't speak. He simply studied her face with unreadable eyes. Another guard slowly raised his pistol. Elena felt her heartbeat pounding inside her chest. She closed her eyes, convinced her life had ended inside a ballroom where nobody would ever remember her name. Then, without understanding why, an old childhood memory surfaced. She remembered sitting in her grandmother's kitchen while warm bread cooled on wooden racks. She remembered being comforted by a lullaby sung in Italian. One single word escaped her lips before fear could stop it. Fratellino. The effect was immediate. Don Vittorio's face turned pale. His crystal wine glass slipped from his fingers and shattered across the marble floor. A silence heavier than fear spread through the ballroom. For the first time in decades, those closest to the Ferrante patriarch saw tears forming in his eyes. He took one slow step toward Elena. His voice was barely above a whisper. Who taught you that word? No one answered. Then Don Vittorio looked toward his son. Gabriel, seal the estate. Call our private laboratory. I want DNA samples taken immediately. As every exit was locked, an unseen figure inside the Ferrante security control room quietly logged into the family's classified archive. Within seconds, files dating back 62 years began disappearing from the system. Just before anyone realized, the investigation had already begun. Within minutes, the Ferrante estate was transformed into a private command center. No guest was allowed to leave. Phones were temporarily confiscated. Every security recording from the gala was reviewed frame by frame. Yet Don Vittorio gave only one instruction. Treat Miss Romano with respect. The order stunned everyone. Only moments earlier, Elena had been on her knees with a gun pointed at her head. Now she was escorted into a private sitting room, normally reserved for heads of state. A physician examined the bruises on her wrists, while another employee brought her tea and a blanket. She looked completely overwhelmed. I don't understand any of this, she said quietly. I've never met Mr. Ferrante. Across the hall, Gabriel Ferrante watched through the glass. His father had not reacted emotionally in decades. He barely smiled. He rarely spoke about the past, but when Elena whispered that single Italian word, Gabriel had seen something he never thought possible. Fear. Not fear of danger. Fear of memory. He entered his father's study. What does Fratellino mean to you? Don Vittorio stared into the fireplace for several seconds before answering. It was the only name my little sister ever called me. Gabriel frowned. But Aunt Isabella died before you came to America. That's what everyone was told. The old man slowly closed his eyes. I buried an empty coffin. Silence filled the room. For the first time in his life, Gabriel realized there might be an entire chapter of his family's history that had never been told. Meanwhile, Elena struggled to answer investigators' questions. Who taught you that word? My grandmother. Was she Italian? I suppose so. What was her name? Lucia Romano. Where was she born? I don't know. The answer embarrassed her. Her grandmother had always avoided speaking about her childhood. Whenever Elena asked about relatives, Lucia would simply smile and change the subject. The only things she passed down were recipes, old lullabies, and the tiny silver pendant Elena had worn since childhood. "It belonged to our family," Lucia used to say. "Never lose it." She never explained why. Gabriel ordered a complete background investigation. Within hours, investigators discovered something unusual. Elena's birth certificate had been issued nearly 6 months after her reported birth. The attending physician listed on the document had died years before the certificate was officially filed. The listed address of the maternity clinic no longer existed. Even stranger, no hospital delivery records could be found. Gabriel requested immigration files for Lucia Romano. Nothing. No passenger manifests. No naturalization records. No Italian census documents. It was as though Elena's grandmother had appeared in America without leaving a single official trace. The deeper investigators searched, the more impossible the story became. Late the following afternoon, another unexpected lead emerged. Father Matteo Orsini, an 88-year-old retired priest from Boston, contacted the Ferrante Foundation after hearing rumors about the mysterious waitress. When shown a photograph of Elena's pendant, the elderly priest became visibly shaken. "I've seen that crest before." Gabriel immediately arranged a private meeting. Inside the chapel where Father Matteo had spent most of his life, the old priest carefully held the photograph with trembling hands. "This isn't ordinary jewelry." He pointed toward the faded engraving. It belonged to an old noble family from northern Italy. "The Ferrantes?" Father Matteo slowly shook his head. "No, an even older bloodline." He looked directly at Gabriel. "I remember a frightened young woman bringing a little girl to our monastery more than 60 years ago. The child wore this exact pendant." Gabriel's heartbeat quickened. "What happened to them?" "They stayed only one night. The woman begged us never to reveal their names. She claimed powerful men were hunting the child." Before Father Matteo could continue, another memory surfaced. There was another man with them. A businessman. He donated a great deal of money to the monastery. Gabriel leaned forward. "Do you remember his name?" The priest hesitated. "I believe it was—" A loud crash interrupted him. The stained glass window behind the altar exploded inward. A masked intruder fired a single shot. Gabriel immediately pulled Father Matteo behind a stone pillar while security agents rushed into the chapel. The attacker escaped on a waiting motorcycle before police arrived. No one was injured, but someone clearly wanted the old priest silenced. That evening, Gabriel returned to Ferrante headquarters, convinced the attack was connected to Elena's past. He hurried into the secure archive room, where investigators had been collecting historical records all day. The room fell silent. Every shelf containing files related to Lucia Romano had been emptied. Storage boxes lay scattered across the floor. Computer hard drives had been wiped clean. Security footage from the archive corridor between 1 and 3 o'clock that morning had vanished completely. Only one item remained: Elena's grandmother's faded immigration application. Across the top, someone had stamped one word in thick red ink decades earlier: sealed. Below it, where the applicant's place of birth should have been, every line had been carefully cut away with a razor blade. Gabriel slowly looked up. This wasn't random. No, this was planned. Someone had been protecting, or hiding, the truth for more than 60 years, and whoever they were, they had just realized the Ferrante family was finally getting close. Just after sunrise, the chief geneticist stepped into Gabriel Ferrante's private office, carrying a sealed envelope. His expression alone told Gabriel the results would change everything. The laboratory repeated the analysis 3 times. The scientist said quietly, "We wanted to eliminate every possibility of contamination." Gabriel opened the report. His eyes stopped on one line. Probability of biological relationship with Don Vittorio Ferrante's maternal bloodline, 99.97%. For several seconds he couldn't speak. The impossible had become fact. Elena Romano wasn't imagining anything. Somewhere in her ancestry flowed the same blood that had built the Ferrante dynasty. When Don Vittorio read the report, his hands trembled. For more than 60 years, he had forced himself to believe his little sister had died during the attack that destroyed their family estate in northern Italy. Now that certainty had vanished, he slowly removed an old black-and-white photograph from his desk drawer. Two children smiled into the camera. A teenage boy stood protectively beside a little girl with bright eyes and braided hair. On the back of the photograph was a handwritten note. "Always protect your little sister." Don Vittorio closed his eyes. I failed her. Elena, standing across the room, felt tears filling her own eyes. She still didn't understand how she was connected to these people. But for the first time since arriving at the estate, she saw not an untouchable billionaire, only an elderly man carrying decades of regret. The investigation expanded beyond America. Private investigators were dispatched to Italy. Church records, orphanage registries, and forgotten village archives were examined one by one. 3 days later, another breakthrough arrived. Hidden beneath the basement of an abandoned monastery near Turin, investigators discovered records from an unofficial rescue network operated during years of political violence. The documents revealed that several children from influential families had been secretly given new identities to protect them from organized criminal factions seeking revenge. One faded ledger contained an entry that caught everyone's attention. Female child. Approximate age, 6. Protected under emergency transfer. New identity assigned. The child's original name had been burned away. But beside the entry appeared a hand-drawn sketch of a familiar pendant. The same pendant Elena had worn since childhood. Before investigators could recover the remaining documents, disaster struck. A black SUV burst through the monastery gate. Masked gunmen opened fire. The rescue team scrambled for cover as ancient stone walls echoed with gunshots. The attackers weren't trying to steal money. They headed directly for the archive room. Someone wanted the records destroyed. Gabriel, who had traveled to Italy personally after receiving the DNA results, grabbed Elena and rushed her through a side corridor while security agents returned fire. Smoke grenades filled the monastery with thick gray clouds. The old building disappeared into confusion. They escaped through a narrow service tunnel, leading toward the hillside parking area. Just as they reached their vehicle, another SUV accelerated toward them. "Drive!" Gabriel shouted. The chase exploded onto the winding mountain roads outside Turin. Black vehicles raced through narrow curves, while armed guards exchanged fire with the attackers. Elena gripped the dashboard, terrified. "I don't understand why they're trying to kill me." Gabriel kept his eyes on the road. "They're not afraid of you. They're afraid of what you prove." After losing the attackers, Gabriel brought Elena to a secluded convent, protected by Ferrante security. Waiting for them was Sister Agnese Conti. The elderly nun had spent nearly 70 years caring for abandoned children. When she saw Elena's pendant, she quietly made the sign of the cross. "I prayed I would live long enough to see that necklace again." Elena leaned forward. "You know where it came from?" Sister Agnese nodded. "I knew the woman who raised your grandmother." The room fell silent. "Your grandmother, Lucia, was never born into the Romano family. She was adopted as a little girl." Elena stared at her. "My grandmother was adopted?" "Yes. She arrived here carrying another little child. The adults told us they were cousins." The nun slowly shook her head. "They lied." "They were sisters." Gabriel's heart pounded. If Lucia wasn't born a Romano, who was she? The elderly nun reached into an old wooden cabinet. Inside rested a weathered envelope, sealed with dark red wax. "I was told never to open this, unless the Ferrante family returned." She carefully handed it to Gabriel. Before he could break the seal, every light inside the convent suddenly went dark. Emergency alarms began echoing through the building. One of Gabriel's bodyguards rushed into the room. "Sir, our communications have been hacked. The outer security team isn't responding." At that exact moment, the convent's heavy front doors exploded inward. Armed men in tactical gear stormed inside. Gabriel immediately drew Elena behind a stone pillar as his security detail engaged the attackers. The leader of the assault calmly stepped through the smoke. He wasn't wearing a mask. Instead, he smiled. Then he spoke words that chilled Gabriel to the core. "You've been searching in the wrong generation. The person who hid the truth has been sitting beside the Ferrante family for decades." Gabriel didn't open the wax-sealed envelope until he and Elena were safely inside a secure Ferrante residence outside Milan. Only 4 people were allowed into the room: Don Vittorio, Gabriel, Elena, and Sister Agnese. The old seal broke with a soft crack. Inside lay several yellowed pages written in elegant Italian handwriting. Sister Agnese immediately recognized it. "These are Isabella's journals." Don Vittorio's breathing became uneven. His younger sister had supposedly died 62 years earlier. Yet someone had preserved her private diary. Gabriel carefully translated the first page aloud. "If anyone ever reads this, it means I failed to return home. The men following our family do not want our money. They want our name to disappear." The room fell silent. Every page revealed another piece of a conspiracy that had begun decades before the Ferrante Empire became famous. The journals described a trusted advisor named Renzo Beraldi. To the outside world, he had been the family's most loyal legal counselor. He managed investments, protected confidential records, negotiated political alliances. Don Vittorio's own father had treated him like family. But Isabella had noticed things no one else had. She repeatedly saw Renzo meeting strangers late at night. Important documents disappeared shortly after passing through his office. Letters addressed to family members never arrived. Whenever she mentioned her concerns, adults dismissed them as childish imagination. 1 week before the attack that supposedly killed her, Isabella secretly wrote one sentence: "If anything happens to me, never trust Renzo." Don Vittorio slowly lowered the journal. His voice shook. "I never saw this." Gabriel looked at his father. "Because someone made sure you never would." Ferrante investigators immediately reopened every surviving company record connected to Renzo Beraldi. What they found was astonishing. Over 6 decades, Renzo had quietly placed former associates into banks, investment firms, law offices, charitable foundations, and government advisory boards connected to the Ferrante Empire. None appeared powerful individually. Together they formed an invisible network, influencing billions of dollars. Even more disturbing, several rival billionaires had secretly received privileged financial information for decades. Every suspicious business victory, every mysterious corporate collapse, every failed acquisition, could now be traced back to confidential information leaking from inside the Ferrante organization. Renzo hadn't wanted to destroy the family. He wanted to control it. Elena struggled to understand why her grandmother had never revealed the truth. Sister Agnese answered quietly, "Because Lucia made a promise." When Isabella realized someone inside the family had betrayed them, she entrusted her little daughter to Lucia. Elena stared in disbelief. My grandmother wasn't protecting herself. No, she was protecting a child, the last living branch of Isabella's bloodline. The nun gently touched Elena's shoulder. Lucia spent her entire life pretending to be ordinary. She refused wealth. She refused recognition. She wanted you to grow up free. Elena remembered every sacrifice her grandmother had made. Working 2 jobs, repairing old clothes instead of buying new ones, selling treasured jewelry to keep the bakery open. She had always believed poverty was simply their fate. Now she understood. Those sacrifices had kept killers from finding them. Back in New York, Gabriel prepared warrants, financial audits, and private arrest teams. He intended to expose every surviving member of Renzo's network at once. Before the operation could begin, however, something unexpected happened. Don Vittorio disappeared. His morning security escort reported that the elderly patriarch had left his private garden for a short walk. He never returned. No gunshots, no struggle, only an abandoned wheelchair beside the fountain. Gabriel immediately ordered the estate sealed. Every surveillance camera was reviewed. One recording finally revealed the truth. Don Vittorio had willingly entered a black sedan. He appeared calm, almost as though he recognized the person waiting inside. Minutes later, the vehicle vanished. A single package was later delivered to Ferrante headquarters. Inside was Don Vittorio's signet ring. Alongside it lay a handwritten note. You spent 62 years searching for your sister. Now come search for your father. No signature. Only one familiar symbol. A faded red crest, identical to the mark found on Isabella's journal. Gabriel clenched the note until it crumpled in his hand. This isn't revenge. It's the final move. That evening, Ferrante intelligence specialists traced an encrypted transmission sent moments before the kidnapping. The signal originated from an abandoned monastery high in the Italian mountains. Property records showed the land had been purchased 40 years earlier by a charitable trust. The trust appeared legitimate, until investigators discovered every board member had once worked under Renzo Beraldi. Gabriel looked at Elena. They've been preparing this place for decades. Elena swallowed nervously. Why keep him alive? Gabriel answered without hesitation. Because my father knows something they still need. As helicopters prepared for departure, Gabriel quietly reached into his coat pocket. There, he found another folded page that had somehow remained hidden inside Isabella's journal. He unfolded it. Only one unfinished sentence appeared. If Renzo ever returns. The rest of the page had been torn away. Before dawn, 3 helicopters crossed the snow-covered peaks of northern Italy. Below them stood an abandoned Benedictine monastery perched on a cliff overlooking a deep valley. Officially, it had been deserted for decades. In reality, it had become the headquarters of the conspiracy that had hidden the Ferrante family's greatest secret for more than 60 years. Thermal cameras revealed nearly 40 armed guards patrolling the compound. Gabriel Ferrante studied the surveillance monitor. They're expecting us. The commander of the security team nodded. They've reinforced every entrance. Gabriel's answer was calm. Then we don't use the entrances. Minutes later, the rescue team descended onto a narrow ridge behind the monastery. A forgotten stone tunnel, once used by monks centuries earlier, led beneath the compound. According to old architectural drawings, it opened directly beneath the wine cellar. The team moved silently through the damp passage. No one spoke. Every step echoed against ancient stone walls. As they climbed the final staircase, Gabriel heard voices above them. One belonged to his father. The other was unfamiliar, but confident. He carefully pushed open the hidden door. Inside the cellar stood Don Vittorio, bound to a wooden chair, but otherwise unharmed. Facing him was an elderly man with silver hair and an expensive tailored coat. Renzo Beraldi, older now, slower, but his cold smile had not changed. You finally came, Renzo said without surprise. I knew you would. Gabriel raised his weapon. It's over. Renzo laughed softly. No, Gabriel. It ended 62 years ago. You simply refused to see it. He slowly walked toward Don Vittorio. "Your father always believed I wanted his fortune." Renzo shook his head. "I wanted stability. The Ferrante family ruled through emotion. I ruled through order." He gestured toward the monastery. "Everything you call an empire exists because I removed weakness." Don Vittorio finally spoke. "You murdered children." Renzo's expression never changed. "I prevented wars." The silence that followed felt heavier than any gunshot. Without warning, alarms blared throughout the compound. Gabriel's communications officer spoke through his earpiece. "Sir, we've been surrounded." More armed men poured into the monastery from underground garages hidden beneath the cliffs. Someone inside Gabriel's own security team had leaked the rescue plan. Almost instantly, confusion spread. Several Ferrante bodyguards turned their weapons, not toward Renzo's men, but toward Gabriel's unit. The betrayal was complete. Damiano Ricci reacted without hesitation. He stepped between Gabriel and the traitors. "Get your father out! I'll hold them." Gunfire erupted inside the ancient monastery. Stone columns shattered. Centuries-old stained glass exploded across the floor. Gabriel and two loyal guards cut Don Vittorio's restraints, while Damiano's team fought to keep the attackers back. As they escaped through the monastery library, Elena made a discovery no one else noticed. One bookshelf had shifted during the explosion. Behind it stood a hidden iron door. Remembering Isabella's unfinished journal, Elena instinctively pushed it open. Inside was a tiny chamber, untouched for decades. No gold. No weapons. Only shelves filled with leather-bound account books. At the center rested a heavy wooden chest. Gabriel forced it open. Inside were the original financial ledgers Isabella had hidden before disappearing. Every payment, every forged transfer, every secret partnership, every bribe stretching back 6 decades. Renzo's entire network had been documented by the one person he believed he had silenced forever. Don Vittorio looked at the ledgers in disbelief. "She knew." Gabriel nodded. "She left us everything we needed." Renzo realized what had happened. For the first time, fear appeared in his eyes. He ordered his remaining followers to destroy the archive. But greed proved stronger than loyalty. Several of his longtime associates lunged toward the chest themselves. Each believed the documents could be exchanged for immunity. Arguments turned into shouting. Shouting turned into violence. Within seconds, Renzo's own allies were pointing guns at one another. The conspiracy that had survived 62 years collapsed from within. Gabriel seized the opportunity. His team rushed Don Vittorio and Elena toward the escape tunnel, while security officers secured the ledgers. Outside, helicopters circled overhead. Italian authorities, acting on evidence Gabriel had transmitted hours earlier, were closing in from every direction. Renzo looked around and finally understood. His empire no longer existed. The people who had once followed him were now bargaining for their own survival. Just as Gabriel reached the tunnel entrance, the entire monastery shook violently. A deafening explosion echoed beneath the foundation. Dust poured from the ceiling. One of the retreating gunmen screamed. They armed the demolition charges. The old monastery had been rigged long before anyone arrived. Massive support beams cracked. Ancient stone walls began collapsing. The escape tunnels split apart as enormous rocks crashed into the passage behind them. Gabriel pulled Elena forward while helping his exhausted father through the falling debris. Behind them, Renzo remained standing in the center of the collapsing library. Surrounded by burning documents and falling stone, he stared silently at the empire of lies he had spent a lifetime building. Then the ceiling gave way. The last thing Gabriel heard before reaching daylight was the thunder of the monastery collapsing into the mountain. As rescue helicopters lifted off, Elena looked back through tears. The ancient compound disappeared beneath a cloud of smoke and snow. But in Gabriel's hands rested the wooden chest containing the original ledgers. The truth had survived. Now the world was about to learn it. The collapse of the monastery marked the end of a conspiracy that had survived for more than 6 decades. Using the original ledgers recovered by Gabriel's team, investigators in both Italy and the United States uncovered an enormous network of corruption hidden behind respected corporations, charitable foundations, and financial institutions. Dozens of powerful executives, attorneys, and public officials were arrested. Assets worth billions of dollars were frozen, while the Ferrante family publicly released every document, proving how the conspiracy had manipulated their empire for generations. For Don Vittorio, however, the greatest victory had nothing to do with wealth. It was truth. Several weeks later, specialists completed the final genealogical investigation. The results confirmed what Isabella's journals had already suggested. Elena Romano was not merely connected to the Ferrante bloodline. She was Isabella Ferrante's granddaughter. The little girl everyone believed had vanished forever had survived through the courage of ordinary people who chose compassion over fear. When reporters asked whether Elena would accept a senior position inside the Ferrante empire, she surprised everyone. She smiled gently and declined. "My grandmother never wanted me to live chasing power," she said. "She taught me that feeding hungry people is worth more than owning another building." Instead of moving into the Ferrante estate, Elena reopened a neighborhood bakery in the same community where her grandmother had raised her. With financial support from the Ferrante Family Foundation, the bakery became a training center for struggling single mothers, widows, and women rebuilding their lives after hardship. Every loaf of bread carried the recipes Lucia had protected for decades, reminding Elena that love could survive even when history tried to erase it. Several months later, before sunrise on a quiet autumn morning, the bakery opened for another ordinary day. Elena had just removed the first warm loaf from the oven when the front door softly opened. Don Vittorio entered alone. No bodyguards, no assistants, no reporters, only an old man carrying memories that had weighed on him for 62 years. Elena sliced the fresh bread and quietly placed it before him. He tasted it, closed his eyes. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then tears slowly rolled down the old patriarch's face. "This," he whispered, "tastes exactly like my mother's kitchen." He reached across the wooden table and gently took Elena's hand. "I spent most of my life believing I had lost my family forever." His voice trembled. "But your grandmother kept a promise that I could not." He smiled through tears. "Welcome home, my Isabella's family." Outside, the morning sun slowly rose over the small bakery. For the first time in more than 60 years, Don Vittorio Ferrante discovered that peace could never be bought with power, protected by armed men, or measured in billions of dollars. Sometimes, it was waiting quietly inside a small neighborhood bakery, in the hands of the family that love had never allowed history to erase.